An excerpt from Survive the Savage Sea. First day. We sat on the salvaged pieces of flotsam, lying on the raft floor, our faces a pale billowy color tinder, the bright yellow canopy, and stared at each other, the shock of the last few minutes gradually seeping through our consciousness. Neil, his teddy bears gone, sobbed in accompaniment to Sandy's hiccup cry, while Lynn repeated the Lord's Prayer, then, comforting them, sang the hymn for those in peril on the sea. Douglas and Robin watched at the doors of the canopy to retrieve any useful pieces of debris which might float within reach, and gazed with dumb longing to the distant 5-gallon water container bobbing its polystyrene lightness ever farther away from us in the steady trade wind. The dinghy Ednamere wallowed, swamped, nearby, with a line attached to it from the raft. Our eyes traveled over and beyond to the heaving undulations of the horizon, already searching for the rescue ship, even while knowing there would not be one. Our eyes traveled fruitlessly across the limitless waste of sea and sky, then once more ranged over the scattering debris. Of the killer whales, which had so recently shattered our very existence, there was no sign. Lynn's sewing basket floated close and was brought aboard following a couple of empty boxes, the canvas raft cover, and a plastic cup. I leaned across to Neil and put my arm around him. "It's all right now, son. We're safe, and the whales have gone." He looked at me reproachfully. "We're not crying because we're frightened," he sobbed. "We're crying because Lucy's gone." Lynn gazed at me over their heads, her eyes filling with tears. "Me too," she said. After a moment added, "I suppose we'd better find out how we stand." We cleared a space on the floor and opened the survival kit, which was part of the raft's equipment and was contained in a 3-foot-long polythene cylinder. Slowly we took stock. Vitamin fortified bread and glucose for 10 men for 2 days. 18 pints of water, 8 flares, 2 parachutes, 6 hand, 1 bailer, 2 large fish hooks, 2 small, 1 spinner and trace, and 1 25-pound breaking strain fish line. A patent knife which would not puncture the raft or anything else for that matter. A signal mirror, torch, first aid box, 2 sea anchors, instruction book, bellows, and 3 paddles. In addition to this, there was a bag of a dozen onions, which I had given to Sandy, to which Lynn had added a pound of tin biscuits, and a bottle containing about half a pound of glucose sweets, 10 oranges, and 6 lemons. How long would this have to last us? As I looked around our meager store, my heart sank, and it must have shown on my face, for Lynn put her hand on mine. "We must get these boys to land," she said quietly. "If we do nothing else with our lives, we must get them to land." I looked at her and nodded. "Of course we'll make it." The answer came from my heart, but my head was telling me a different story. Sixth day. At 4 a.m, we were dozing quietly when a flying fish flew straight through the door of the raft, striking Lynn in the face. Now, Lynn is a very steady and reliable person in a crisis. She seems to be able to do the right thing and say at the right time automatically, while less able people like myself are floundering around wondering what to do. But her reaction to being slapped in the face by a wet fish at 4 a.m, after all our previous excitement, had us all scrambling around the raft looking for something like the Loch Ness Monster until the 8-inch levitation was finally secured and made safe for breakfast. Seventh day. Douglas, lazily watching the dispersing clouds, sat up with a start, pointing excitedly. "A ship! A ship! It's a ship!" We all crowded to the door of the raft, staring in the direction of his pointing finger. A cargo vessel, about 6,000 tons, was approaching us in a course that would bring her within 3 miles of us. I felt my heart pounding against my ribs. "Get out the flares," I said hoarsely, "and pass them to me in the dinghy. They'll see us better from there." 3 miles was a fair distance, but on a dull day like this, against the background of rain, they should see us easily. I clambered into the dinghy, and Douglas passed me the rockets and hand flares. My hands trembled as I ripped open a parachute rocket flare, and, with a mute appeal to the thing to fire, struck the igniter on the fuse. It sputtered and hissed, then roared off in a trajectory high above the raft. Its pinkish magnesium flare slowly spiraling downward, leaving a trail of smoke in the sky. They couldn't fail to see it. I waited a moment or two, watching for the ship to alter course, then struck a hand flare, holding it high above my head. The blinding red light was hot to hold, and I pointed it away from the wind to ease my hand, the red embers of the flare dropping into the dinghy. As it went out, I struck another, smoke from the first now rising plume in the sky. Surely they must see that. I waited a little, my hand trembling. "This chance might not come again," I said, anxious faces crowding the door of the raft. "I'm going to use our last rocket flare and one more hand flare." We watched tensely as the second rocket flare soared and spiraled its gleaming distress message high above us. Desperately, I struck the third hand flare, and it held high, standing on the thwart and holding on to the mast. "Look! Look!" I shouted. "Set fire to the sail!" Lynn's voice. I struck the flare to the sail, but it only melted. The ship sailed on slowly, disappearing behind the rain shower, and when she reappeared, her hull was half obscured by the horizon, 5 miles distant and disappearing fast. The time was 11 o'clock. My shoulders drooped. "We daren't use another," I said. "They won't see it now, and we've kept something for the next one." We had 3 hand flares left. Lynn smiled cheerfully. "It says in the instruction book that the first ones probably wouldn't see us," she said slowly, "and I'd already told the twins not to expect anything." She gathered the twins to her comfortingly. We stared at the dwindling speck on the horizon and felt so alone, so lonely that it hurt. "I'm sorry, lads." I felt very tired. We used to consider that one of the most important tenets of good seamanship was keeping a good lookout. That lot seemed to be pretty poor seamen. Our position was 3 degrees north and 240 miles west of Espinosa, almost 95 degrees 20 feet west. On Wednesday, 21st of June, midsummer's day on the route from Panama to the Marquise. The ship was westbound. I surveyed the empty flare carton bitterly, and the one smoke flare, which was damp and wouldn't work, for something happened to me in that instant that for me changed the whole aspect of our predicament. If these poor bloody seamen couldn't rescue us, then we would have to make it on our own, and to the devil with them. We would survive without them. Yes, that was the word from now on. Survival. Not rescue or help or dependence of any kind, just survival. I felt the strength flooding through me, lifting me from the depression of disappointment to a state of almost cheerful abandon. I felt bitter aggression of the predator fill my mind. This was not our environment, and the beast around us would eat us if we failed. We would carve a place for ourselves among them. They had millions of years of adaptation on their side, but we had brains and some tools. We would live for 3 months or 6 months from the sea if necessary, but we would get these boys to land, as Lynn had said, and we would do it ourselves if there was no other way. From that instant on, I became savage. 14th day. We had a sip of water for breakfast, with no dried food to detract from its value, after which I crossed to the dinghy to try for Dorado. The heat of the sun's rays beat on my head like a club, and my mouth, dry like a lizard skin, felt full of my tongue, and the slightest exertion left me breathless. I picked up the spear. The Dorado were all deep down, as if they knew I was looking for them. A bump at the stern of the raft attracted Sandy's attention. "Turtle!" he yelled. This one was much smaller than the first, and with great care it was caught and passed through the raft, with Douglas guarding its beak, and the others its claws, from damaging the fabric, to me on the dinghy, where I lifted it aboard with much trouble. I wrapped a piece of tape around the broken knife blade and made an incision into its throat. "Catch the blood," Lynn called from the raft. "It should be all right to drink a little." I held up the plastic cup under the copious flow of blood. The cup filled quickly, and I struck another under as soon as it was full. Then, raising the cup to my lips, tested it cautiously. It wasn't salty at all. I tilted the cup and drained it. "Good stuff!" I shouted. I felt as if I had just consumed the elixir of life. "Here, take this." And I passed the bailer full of blood, about a pint, to the raft for the others to drink. Lynn said afterward she had imagined that she would have to force it down us, and the sight of me draining the cup, my mustache dripping with blood, was quite revolting. I don't know what I looked like, but it certainly tasted good, and as the others followed my example, it seemed as though they thought so too. I passed another pint across, and though some of this coagulated before it could be drunk, the jelly was cut up and the released serum collected and used as gravy with the dried turtle and fish. I set to cutting my way into the turtle much refreshed, and even with the broken knife made faster work of it than the first one, both because it was smaller and, being younger, the shell was not so tough. The fact I now knew my way around inside the turtle helped a lot too. I looked around the raft at the remains of Robin and the Robertson family, water-wrinkled skin covered with salt water boils and raw red patches of rash lying on the bottom of the raft, unmoving except to bail occasionally, and then only half-heartedly, for the water was cooling in the heat of the day. Our bones showed clearly through our scanty flesh. We had become much thinner these last few days, and our condition was deteriorating fast. The raft was killing us with its demands on our energy. Douglas looked across at me. "Do you think it'll rain tonight, Dad?" I looked at him and shrugged. Looked at the sky. Not a cloud. "I suppose it could," I said. "Do you think it will?" he insisted. "For heaven's sake, Douglas, I'm not a prophet," I said testily. "We'll just have to wait it out." His eyes looked hopelessly at the blue of the sea from the deep cavities under his brow. How could I comfort him when he knew, as well as I, that it might not rain for a week, and that we'd be dead by then? I said, "Fresh turtle tea? We can suck something out of that. We could live on turtles, maybe." We took no water that evening, only a little for the twins. We talked of the dishes we'd like to eat in the gathering twilight, and I chose fresh fruit salad and ice cream. Lynn, a tin of apricots. Robin, strawberries and ice cream with milk. Douglas, the same as me. Neil, chocolate chip ice cream. Sandy, fresh fruit, ice cream and milk. Gallons of ice cool milk. Later that night, as I took the watch over from Douglas, he described in detail the dish he had dreamed up during his watch. "You take a honeydew melon," he said. "Cut off the top and take out the seeds. That's the dish. Chill it and drop a knob of ice cream. Then pile in strawberries, raspberries, pieces of apple, pear, oranges, peach, and grapefruit, the sweet sort. Then cherries and grapes until the melon is full. Pour a lemon syrup over it, and then decorate it with chips of chocolate and nuts. Then, he said with a dreamy expression on his face, you eat it. I'll have one too, I said, taking the baler from his boil-covered hand. I looked at the sky. To the northeast, a faint film of curious clouds dimmed the stars. You know, I think it might rain by morning. I could feel him relax in the darkness. His voice came slowly. I'll be all right if it doesn't, Dad, he said. 15th day. The twins were talking when Douglas, on watch, his voice desperate with dismay, called, Dad, the dinghy's gone. I was across the raft in an instant. I looked at the broken end of wire trailing in the water, the broken line beside it. The dinghy was 60 yards away, sailing still, and our lives were sailing away with it. I was the fastest swimmer. No time for goodbyes. To the devil with the sharks. The thoughts ran through my head, and I was diving through the door, my arms flailing into a racing crawl, even as I hit the water. I heard Lynn cry out, but there was no time for talk. Could I swim faster than the dinghy could sail? That was the point. I glanced at it as I lifted my head to breathe. The sail had collapsed as the dinghy yawed. I moved my arms faster, kicked harder. Would sharks let me? That was another point. My belly crawled as I thought of the sharks. My arms moved faster. Still I glanced again. Only 30 yards to go, but she was sailing again. I felt no fatigue, no cramped muscles. My body felt like a machine as I thrashed my way through the sea. Only one thought in my mind now, the dinghy, or us. Then I was there. With a quick heave, I flipped over the stern of the dinghy to safety, reached up, and tore down the sail before my knees buckled, and I lay across the thwart, trembling and gasping for breath, my heart pounding like a hammer. I lifted my arm and waved to the raft, now 200 yards away. Then, slowly, I untied the paddle from the sail and paddled back to the raft. It took nearly a half an hour. The long shapes of two sharks circled curiously 20 feet down. They must have had breakfast. I felt we had already gone beyond thinking in terms of survival. We had started living from the sea and as an adapted way of life. For not only were we surviving, we were improving our physical condition. As we settled to rest, I pondered the philosophies of advocates of at-sea living. To my mind, there was little prospect of man developing a cultural relationship with the sea in the way that he's done with the land. The predatory emotions are brought to the fore to make living possible in this primary style are not compatible with the emotional beauty or intellectual finesse. However, we no longer thought of the rescue as one of the main objectives of our existence. We were no longer the subject to daily disappointment, only to long vigil to the very idea that might be at hand or was necessary. We no longer had a helpless feeling of dependence on others or our continued existence. We were alone, stood alone, inhabitants in the savage sea. 29th day. We made good headway in the gentle westerly breeze throughout the night, with the sea anchor tripped and the Ednamere making over a knot to the east-northeast. The rising sun guided our daily progress, and the business of survival resumed its daily routine. I had barely started work on my gaff when, looking down into the sea past the flashing blue, green, and gold of the Dorado, I spotted the brown shape of a shark. We had caught a flying fish in the night, a very small one, so I put it on a large hook and weighted the line heavily, and I cast well out to clear the scavenger fish. My baited hook drifted down past the shark, and at first I thought he was going to ignore it. But after it came to rest, he turned and nosed toward it. Douglas, stretched across the dinghy in my usual place beside the thwart, called, "What are you doing, Dad?" "Catching a shark," I said calmly, watching the shark nose a little closer. "You're bloody mad," Douglas said, sitting up quickly. Robin, too, was sitting up apprehensively, and Lynn said, "You mustn't." "Good old Dad," said Neil and Sandy from the bow. "I'm having him," I said, watching tensely now as the shark reached for the bait. The moment I felt him touch, I would have to strike, for if he got the nylon line between his teeth, he would bite through it like butter. I was going to try to get the steel shank of the hook between his jaws. He was over it now. I felt the contact with tingling fingers and struck swiftly. The line exploded into action. He was hooked. He fought with alternate periods of listless acquiescence and galvanic action, twisting and plunging savagely to rid himself of the hook. I was afraid of the line breaking, but I feared more of the arrival of the larger shark, which would attack the hooked one. Slowly, foot by foot, he came to the surface, the line cutting deep to the heel of my hand. Lynn sat ready in the stern, paddle in hand. The shark broke surface and struggled savagely and plunged deeply. I had to let him go. He was still too strong. But he was nice 5-footer, a mako shark, Douglas said. He was our shark expert. And I'd hooked him in the eye. Back up he came. "We'll have him this time," I grunted, my hands aching. "Be ready to take up the line, Robin. I'm going to grab his tail and pull him in that way." Excitement rose high in the dinghy. Robin and Lynn looked a bit uncomfortable at being given the biting end to look after, but were determined to do their best. I knew he would break free if I tried to haul him in head first by the line. The shark surfaced again. Gingerly, Robin took the line from my hand as I quickly leaned over and grabbed the shark's tail. "Trim!" I shouted to Douglas, and Douglas leaned out over the side of the dinghy. The harsh skin gave me a good grip, and with a quick pull, the shark lay over the gunwale. "Lift its head now." I kept a firm grip on the tail as Robin lifted the struggling fish inboard with the line. Lynn rammed the paddle into the gaping jaws, and they clamped shut on it. Knife in hand, I leaned forward and stabbed it through the other eye. The shark struggled, then lay still. Giving Douglas the tail to hold, I stabbed the knife into the slits of the gill behind the head, swaying at the tough skin until finally the head was severed. "Right. You can let go now." I felt like Bruce after Bannockburn. We had turned the tables on our most feared enemy. Sharks would not eat the Robertsons. Robertsons would eat sharks. Quietly, I gutted out the liver and heart, a solid 35 to 40 pounds of fish, with very little waste apart from the head. We breakfasted on the liver and heart, then Robin chewed the head, watching carefully for razor-sharp teeth while I cut strips of white flesh from the almost boneless carcass. It was tougher than the Dorado, but juicier, and we had chewed the moist strips of shark meat with great relish. 38th day. The clouds grew thicker that afternoon. As the afternoon advanced, it was going to be a wet night again, and perhaps we would be able to fill the water sleeve. 7 gallons of water seemed like wealth beyond measure in our altered sense of values. I chopped up some dried turtle meat for tea, and Lynn put it in with a little wet fish to soak in meat juice. She spread the dry sheets for the twins under the canopy, then prepared their little supper as we started to talk of Dougal's kitchen, and if it should have a wine license. As we pondered the delights of the Gaelic coffee, my eye, looking past the sail, caught sight of something that wasn't sea. I stopped talking and stared. The others all looked at me. "A ship," I said. "There's a ship, and it's coming towards us." I could hardly believe it, but it seemed solid enough. Keep still now. In the sudden surge of excitement, everyone wanted to see. Trimmer! We mustn't capsize now! All sank back to their places. I felt my voice tremble as I told them that I was going to stand on the thwart and hold flare above the sail. They trimmed the dinghy as I stood on the thwart. Right. Hand me a flare. And remember what happened with the last ship we saw. They suddenly fell silent in the memory of that terrible despondency when our signals had been unnoticed. Oh, God, prayed Lynn, please let them see us. I could see the ship quite clearly now. A Japanese tuna fisher. Her gray and white paint stood out clearly against the dark cross swell. Like a great white bird, Lynn said to the twins, and she would pass within about a mile of us at her nearest approach. I relayed the information as they listened excitedly. The tension of not knowing, the immense rescue, building like intangible, touchable, unreality around me. My eye caught the outlines of two large sharks, 100 yards to starboard. Watch the trim, I warned. We have two man-eating sharks if we capsize. Then, I'm going to light a flare now. Have the torch ready in case it doesn't work. I ripped the caps off, pulled out the striker, and struck the primer. The flare smoked, then sparked into life. The red glare illuminating Edmund and the sea around us in the twilight. I could feel my index finger roasting under the heat of the flare and waved it to and fro to escape the searing heat radiating outward in the calm air. Then, unable to bear the heat any longer, I dropped my arm, nearly scorching Lynn's face, and threw the flare in the air. It curved in a brilliant arc and dropped into the sea. Hand me another. I think she's altered course. My voice was hoarse with pain and excitement, and I felt sick with apprehension that it might only be the ship corkscrewing in the swell, for she had made no signal that she had seen us. The second flare didn't work. I cursed it in frustrated anguish, and priming substance chipped off instead of lighting. The torch, I shouted, but it wasn't needed. She had seen us and was coming towards us. I flopped down on the thwart. Our ordeal is over, I said quietly. Lynn and the twins were crying with happiness. Douglas, with tears of joy in his eyes, hugged his mother. Robin laughed and cried at the same time, slapped me on the back, and shouted, Wonderful! We've done it! Oh, wonderful! I put my arms about Lynn, feeling the tears stinging stinging my own eyes. We'll get these boys to land after all. As we shared our happiness and watched the fishing boat close with us, death would have taken me quite easily just then, for I knew that I would never experience another such pinnacle of contentment. In the days that followed, we indulged in the luxury of eating and drinking wonderful food, the meals growing in quantity and sophistication. The familiar figure of the cook, Shaki Shisaki, became the symbol around which our whole expense revolved, as he bore tray after tray up the boreback of the Spanish soup, prawns, fruit juice, fried chicken, roast pork, tinned fruit, fermented rice water, coffee, and a special treat, lemon-flavored tea, and always in the background of our diet, like the foundation stones of the building, bread and butter. The assault on our stomachs seemed unending, and even when they were full, we still felt hungry. A most frustrating sensation. Our bones and bodies ached in contact with the tentacled deck, luxuriated in the deep, hot seawater bath, groaned under the burden of indigestion, relaxed in the cool tropical night, and each day we gently exercised our swollen ankles and weakly legs, learning to walk again. In our days, Captain Suzeki and his wonderful crew brought milk of happiness, of kindness and happiness to our tortured spirits, and peace to our savaged minds.